Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of the suppressed Glock kissed Julian's temple, cold as the man holding it. "Look at me!" The command wasn't shouted. It was whispered with the terrifying calm of a predator who had already won. Julian forced his chin up, his breath hitching in a ragged throat, meeting eyes that were pools of molten gold. The eyes of a man he had spent 5 years running from, 5 years mourning, and 5 years loving in the darkest corners of his memory. This wasn't supposed to happen. The extraction was meant to be clean, grab the files, get the money, and disappear back into the shadows before the viper of the syndicate, Cashin Kostov, ever knew his former lover was still breathing. But the trap had been sprung with humiliating ease, and now, Julian knelt on the plush Persian rug of a penthouse office that smelled of expensive scotch, gunpowder, and the overwhelming, spicy scent of an enraged alpha. "I thought you were a ghost," Cashin murmured, his thumb brushing the bruise forming on Julian's cheekbone, a tender gesture that contradicted the gun pressed to his skull. "But ghosts don't bleed, and they certainly don't break into my headquarters to steal ledger codes." Julian swallowed the copper taste of fear. He couldn't speak. If he spoke, he would break. If he broke, Cashin would find out everything. And if Cashin found out, the precarious house of cards Julian had built to protect their children would collapse, burying them all. "Nothing to say?" Cashin's voice dropped an octave, the vibration rattling Julian's ribcage. The alpha removed the gun, only to grip Julian's jaw with a bruising strength. "You left me. You vanished into the night without a word, leaving me with a ring in a velvet box and a bed that smelled like you for months. I tore the city apart. I burned down rival territories thinking they had taken you. And here you are, a thief in the night." "I did what I had to do," Julian rasped. His voice cracked from disuse and dehydration. "To do what?" Cashin stood up, his towering frame casting a long shadow over Julian. He was immaculate in a charcoal three-piece suit, the only sign of his inner turmoil being the white-knuckled grip on his weapon and the chaotic swirl of pheromones filling the room. Burnt cedar and ozone, the scent of a storm about to break. "To betray me? To sell my secrets? I never sold you out," Julian shouted, the defiance flaring up. It was that same fire that had drawn Cashin to him years ago when Julian was just a lowly archivist and Cashin was the heir to the Kostov Empire. "Then explain," Cashin roared, the sound echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the rainy cityscape of Neo-Viridia. "Explain why the love of my life, my fated mate, gutted me and ran." Julian looked away. He couldn't tell him. The threat Cashin's father had made 5 years ago was still valid. "Leave him, or I will ensure his rise to power is built on your corpse." Julian had chosen Cashin's life over their love. But he hadn't known then that he was carrying 2 heartbeats within him. "I fell out of love," Julian lied. The words tasted like ash. "I didn't want this life, Cashin. I didn't want the blood, the fear. I wanted to be free." Cashin's expression shattered. For a split second, the ruthless Don was gone, replaced by the heartbroken young man Julian had left behind. But the walls slammed back up instantly, reinforced with steel and ice. "Free?" Cashin scoffed, turning his back to pour a drink, his movements sharp and agitated. "You think you're free now? You're a trespasser in the lion's den. By the laws of the syndicate, I should execute you where you stand." "Then do it," Julian whispered, closing his eyes. At least the twins are safe. Mrs. Gable will take care of them. They'll never know their father was a monster, and they'll never know their papa died a liar." Cashin spun around, glass in hand, eyes narrowing. "You want death that badly? Or are you hiding something else? You were never a coward, Julian. You were the only one brave enough to tell me no. This submission, it doesn't suit you." Before Julian could construct another lie, the heavy oak doors of the office didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a resounding crash. The commotion that followed was a cacophony of deep, panicked voices. Cashin's elite guards. "Boss, wait. Don't shoot. We found them in the lobby. They bypassed the biometric lock. We don't know how. Cashin's hand went to his gun again, his instincts screaming assassin. He turned toward the door, his killing intent flooding the room, thick enough to choke on. I told you I was not to be disturbed unless the building was burning down. It's not that, sir, it's, let go of me, you ugly gorilla. A high-pitched, shrill voice cut through the tension like a diamond cutter through glass. Julian's blood froze. The air left his lungs. Asterisk no. God, no. Asterisk 2 guards, men who could break necks with a single hand, stumbled into the room. They looked terrified, not of Cashin, but of the 2 small whirlwinds they were struggling to restrain. We want to see the boss, yelled the second voice, identical to the first but deeper, laced with a growl that was adorably, terrifyingly familiar. Cashin froze. The glass in his hand slipped, shattering against the hardwood floor. The sound was a gunshot in the silence. There, struggling against the black-clad guards, were 2 children. They couldn't have been more than 4 years old. A boy and a girl. The boy, Leo, was wearing a chaotic ensemble of denim overalls and a superhero cape. His hair was a riot of dark curls, messy and wild. The girl, Lyra, wore a yellow raincoat and rain boots, her hair pulled back in pigtails that whipped around as she kicked the guard in the shin. But it wasn't their clothes that stopped Cashin's heart. It was their faces. They had Julian's delicate nose and the stubborn set of his jaw. But their eyes were pools of molten gold. Cashin's eyes. Let them go, Julian screamed, the sound tearing from his throat as he scrambled to his feet, ignoring the gun, ignoring the danger. Don't touch them. The guards, confused by the prisoner's outburst, hesitated. That hesitation was all Lyra needed. She bit the hand holding her arm. The guard yelped, releasing her. Leo stomped on the other guard's foot with a heavy rain boot and broke free. The 2 children didn't run to Julian. They ran to the center of the room, standing shoulder to shoulder, puffing out their small chests, blocking the path between the terrifying Alpha Mafia boss and the trembling Omega on the floor. Hey, old man, Leo shouted, pointing a small, accusatory finger at Cashin. Cashin blinked. He was the Don of the Kostov family. He controlled the docks, the politicians, and the flow of capital in 3 cities. People didn't point fingers at him. They didn't call him old man. You're the big bad wolf, right? Lyra demanded, her hands on her hips, staring up at Cashin with zero fear. Mommy Gable said the big bad wolf lives in the tall tower. Cashin looked from the children to Julian and back to the children. The math was instantaneous. 5 years. They looked for. The resemblance was undeniable. It wasn't just biology. It was the aura. Even at this age, the boy was projecting a clumsy, aggressive alpha protective instinct, while the girl had the sharp, analytical gaze of a high-tier Omega. Who are you? Cashin whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in a decade. We're the rescue team, Leo declared, puffing out his chest. We tracked Papa's phone. You took him. Give him back. Yeah, Lyra added, taking a step forward, her tiny yellow boots squeaking on the expensive floor. Give us our Papa or we're gonna tell on you. Tell on me? Cashin asked, a strange, surreal numbness spreading through his limbs. To Grandma, Leo threatened. Julian covered his face with his hands, a sob escaping him. Of course, he had told them stories about a grandma, Cashin's mother, who had passed away years ago, as a way to keep a connection to their father's heritage without revealing the truth. The guard who had been bitten stepped forward, rubbing his hand, his face twisting into a sneer. He was new, a recruit from a rival gang absorption, eager to prove his loyalty and lacking the sense to read the room. Boss, I'm sorry, the guard growled, reaching for his stun baton. These brats must be with the spy. I'll maximize the pressure. If we hurt the kids, the Omega will talk. It's standard protocol. The guard took a step toward Leo, the electric crackle of the baton igniting. Listen here, you little shits. The air in the room didn't just change. It vanished. A pressure, heavy and suffocating, slammed into the floor. It was the crushing weight of a dominant alpha's full, unrestrained pheromones. It smelled of ozone, blood, and absolute primal territorial rage. Julian gasped, falling back to his knees, his instincts screaming submit. The guard with the baton didn't even have time to scream. Cashin moved. He didn't move like a man. He moved like a shadow separating from the wall. One moment he was by the desk, the next he was between the children and the guard. There was a sickening crack, the sound of a wrist being snapped with efficient, brutal precision. The baton clattered to the floor. Cashin didn't stop. He grabbed the guard by the throat, lifting a 200-pound man off the floor with one hand as if he were made of straw. He slammed the man into the nearest wall, the plaster cracking behind the impact. "What did you say?" Cashin asked. His voice was no longer human. It was a low, guttural growl that vibrated in the teeth of everyone present. "Repeat yourself." The guard clawed at Cashin's hand, his face turning purple, legs kicking uselessly. "B-boss. Protocol. Leverage. You thought," Cashin hissed, leaning in, his golden eyes glowing with a feral luminosity, "that you could threaten my blood? That you could raise a weapon against my children in my house?" The room went deathly silent. The other guards dropped to their knees, heads bowed, trembling. They recognized the tone. It was the voice of the Reaper. "I didn't. No." The guard wheezed. "Ignorance is not a shield," Cashin snarled. He threw the man across the room. He slid across the polished floor, unconscious before he hit the far wall. Cashin stood there, chest heaving, his hands curled into fists. He looked terrifying. A monster in a tailored suit, radiating violence. He turned slowly to face the children. Julian tried to scramble forward. "Cashin, please, they're just kids, don't." But Leo and Lyra weren't crying. They weren't cowering. They were staring at Cashin with wide, awestruck eyes. "Whoa," Leo whispered, his mouth hanging open. "Did you see that, Lyra? He threw the bad man. He's super strong," Lyra agreed, nodding solemnly. "Like the Hulk, but with a better suit." The red haze of rage in Cashin's eyes receded, replaced by a shock so profound it left him breathless. He looked down at the two small beings who were looking up at him not with fear, but with admiration. He slowly crouched down, ignoring the creak of his expensive trousers, until he was at eye level with them. The monster was gone. In its place was a man looking at a miracle he didn't believe he deserved. "You!" Cashin's voice broke. He reached out a trembling hand, hovering it near Leo's face but afraid to touch, as if the boy were an illusion that would shatter. "You tracked his phone?" "I built the app," Lyra said proudly, tapping the cheap plastic watch on her wrist. "Papa's phone has a bug. I put it there so he wouldn't get lost when he goes to the market." Cashin let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He looked up at Julian, who was still kneeling, tears streaming down his face. "Julian," Cashin said, the name a prayer. "Are they?" "Yours," Julian whispered. "They're yours, Cashin. They always were." Cashin closed his eyes, a single tear escaping, tracking through the hard lines of his face. He took a deep, shuddering breath, inhaling the scent he had missed for 5 years, Julian's vanilla and old books, mixed with the new, fresh scent of milk and rain that clung to the children. "Why?" Cashin asked, looking back at Julian. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, aching wound. "Why did you keep them from me? Did you hate me that much?" "I loved you that much," Julian cried out. "Your father. He came to me, before you took the chair. He said if I stayed, he'd kill me. I didn't care about me, but then I found out about them. He would have seen them as bastards, as weaknesses. Couldn't risk it, Cashin. I had to run to keep them safe from your world." Cashin's face hardened, not at Julian, but at the memory of his father, a cruel tyrant who had died 3 years ago, a death Cashin had hastened, though he had never admitted it aloud. "My father is dead," Cashin said, his voice steel. "He cannot hurt you. No one can hurt you. Not anymore." He looked back at the twins. "Do you know who I am?" Leo squinted. You're the boss? The alpha? I am, Cashin nodded. But before that, I am your father. The silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Leo looked at Lyra. Lyra looked at Leo. A silent twin communication passed between them. Does that mean you have money? Lyra asked bluntly. Julian choked on a laugh through his tears. Lyra, what? She defended herself. Papa says we're broke because the heating bill is astronomical. Cashin let out a bark of laughter, a genuine, rich sound that seemed to startle even him. Yes, I have money. I have enough money to buy the heating company. Cool, Leo decided. He stepped forward and awkwardly patted Cashin's shoulder. You can be our dad, but you have to apologize to Papa. You made him cry. Cashin's amusement vanished, replaced by a solemn gravity. He stood up and walked over to Julian. He didn't pull him up roughly this time. He knelt. The king of the underworld, the alpha of alphas, knelt on the floor before his omega. Julian, Cashin said, taking Julian's hands in his. They were rougher than he remembered, callous from years of hard work. He kissed the palms, sending shivers up Julian's arms. I am sorry. I failed to protect you from my own family. I failed to see the burden you were carrying. I thought you were the villain, but you were the hero of this story all along. Cashin. Julian leaned forward, their foreheads touching. The bond between them, dormant for years, roared back to life, a blazing fire of connection that made the air shimmer. I was so scared. Never again, Cashin vowed. He looked over Julian's shoulder at the guards who were slowly getting back to their feet, nursing their wounds. His eyes went cold again. Everyone out. Now, take the trash with you, he gestured to the unconscious man. And if anyone speaks of what happened here, I will cut out their tongues. The room cleared in seconds. When they were alone, the twins approached cautiously. Are you gonna kiss? Leo asked, making a face. Gross. It is necessary for the plot, Lyra whispered loudly. Mommy Gable watches shows like this. Cashin smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his face. He reached out and this time he pulled the children into his arms. They were small, warm, and solid. They fit against his chest as if they were pieces of his soul that had been missing. He pulled Julian in as well, creating a tight, impenetrable circle of warmth. We have a lot to talk about, Cashin murmured into Julian's hair. And you have a lot of explaining to do about this. Bug on my phone that I assume Lyra has already planted. Lyra grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. Maybe. But first, Cashin said, standing up and lifting both children into his arms effortlessly, much to their delight. He looked at Julian with a heat that promised a very different kind of interrogation later. First, we are going home. My home. Our home. What about the bad guys? Leo asked, looking at the door. Cashin's expression darkened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of the terrifying alpha returning. Don't worry about the bad guys, little wolf. Papa protected you for 5 years. Now it's my turn. And I promise you, the world will burn before anyone takes you from me again. As they walked out of the office, leaving the shattered glass and the past behind them, Julian finally let out the breath he had been holding for 5 years. He watched the broad back of the man he loved carrying their children, and he knew with absolute certainty that the running was over. The viper had found his heart, and God help anyone who tried to touch it. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf, and how 2 small cubs brought a mafia empire to its knees. If you enjoyed seeing Cashin switch from ruthless killer to protective father in a heartbeat, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments. If you were in Julian's shoes, would you have kept the secret to save your lover, or told the truth and risked their life? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.